Hi class, welcome back. Last week we talked about the process of narrowing down a broad research interest into specific research questions and hypotheses. We learned that it is a process guided by related theories and literature. Once you're able to clearly state the research questions, the next critical step is to identify the variables that are needed in order to sufficiently answer the research questions of your survey study. To take the steps from research question to the list of variables, there are a few things you need to keep in mind. First, based on the theoretical framework that you have identified during the development of the research questions, you can have a pretty good idea about what factors are involved in this process. Using my example of college student retention, my research question was what academic, social, and institutional experiences may influence the persistence of college students. The questions are constructed based on the major theories about student retention. All of them talked about academic engagement, social integration, and institutional experience. To be consistent with the theoretical framework and other studies on college retention, I named the variables as academic engagement, social engagement, institutional experience, and persistence. So I know these are the major variables to quantify in my survey study. Second, you need to read published articles in which research questions closely relate to or similar to your questions have been answered. How did they measure those variables? Third, you also need to be mindful about causal and background factors as suggested in the literature and theories. For example, are you interested in potential impact on student persistence from financial resources, high school academic performance, and gender differences? Once you have this list of variables, the next key step is to operationalize those variables, which means that you need to come up with reliable and valid measures of the variables that you have identified in the last step. This step is called operationalization. To begin this process of operationalization, you need to clearly define the variables. Armed with clear definitions, you will be able to classify all variables on the list into two types. One is the so-called concepts by intuition. The other is the concepts by postulation. Concepts by intuition are those variables that are part of common knowledge and can be directly measured. For example, I would like to gather information about student gender. I could ask them to self-identify as male, female, or other type. Concepts by postulation, from now on, we're going to call them constructs, are those variables that are difficult to get direct measures of. Examples of construct can be found everywhere. For example, depression, motivation, and in my college student retention example, academic engagement, social engagement, institutional experience, and persistence are all constructs that I have to take extra steps in order to get accurate, reliable, and valid measures for. Another difference between concept by intuition and construct is that it is easy and straightforward to get a clear definition for the former, but takes effort to get a good definition for those in the latter category. A construct is usually defined by using other concepts that were already understood. Therefore, the process to define a construct is also called the conceptualization of a construct. When you start the project, most likely you had a loose idea about those constructs. But now It's the time for you to get information from the literature and related theories about the dimensions that show different aspects of a given construct. Each dimension is an aspect of the construct that can be defined using some concepts by intuition and directly measured. For example, according to the literature, academic engagement needs to be conceptualized from two aspects: formal academic integration, which can be measured by student academic achievement, and informal academic integration, which can be assessed through learning activities outside classroom, such as participation in study groups and interaction with faculty members. Once you know the dimensions of a construct, you are ready to decide on their indicators. Let's use depression as another example. According to the APA, depression is a common and serious medical illness that negatively affects how a person feels and the way he or she thinks and acts. Depression causes feelings of sadness and or a loss of interest in activities an individual once enjoyed. It can lead to a variety of emotional and physical problems. However, you cannot just directly observe a person for depression as it is defined above. Rather, you need to measure its symptoms, the so-called indicators. You need to evaluate symptoms such as loss of interest, loss of appetite, loss of sleep, increased fatigue, and thoughts of suicide. Those are the indicators that you can measure directly. In other words, for each construct, you need to dissect it into subdimensions based on the literature. Within each dimension, you need to identify measurable indicators. So at the end, those indicators together will form a comprehensive and reliable evaluation of the construct you are interested in measuring. Once operationalization of a construct is complete, the last step is to develop survey questions and empirically measure all dimensions of a construct. We'll talk about writing questions in detail in the next couple of weeks. Before we move on, I just want to mention that in the textbook, the differences between formative indicators and reflective indicators are introduced. But in most cases, formative indicators are preferred because reflective indicators are prone to adding noise in measurement accuracy. The operationalization we're talking about here is the best approach to identify formative indicators. I have to admit, operationalization of the variables is time consuming and takes a lot of work. But I cannot stress enough how critical it is for the quality of your survey instrument. A quick summary to share with you at the end of this part of my lecture. All of us in this class are academic researchers. It's very likely that you need to use survey research to identify the causes of social behaviors or even test causal propositions. In these types of social science research, constructs are very common. All the steps we just went over. Step 1, develop an inventory of variables that are potentially relate to the research objectives. Step 2, classify the variables as concepts by intuition or constructs. Step 3, operationalize construct with theoretical and or empirical support. Are part of this thoughtful preparation for writing reliable and valid survey questions. In addition, I strongly recommend that you develop a preliminary model that explains the relationships between the variables of interest. The model will help you with careful and systematic conceptualization and operationalization and reduce the risk of collecting biased or even useless data. Once you complete operationalizing your variables, it's time to think about how to write survey questions to measure the concepts. On this slide, I provided some common social science concepts. They can be concept by intuition or constructs. The common concepts in social science can be grouped into four categories: attitude or preference, beliefs or judgment, fact or behavior, and demographic characteristics. Attitude is about like or dislike something. Preference is more about the comparison of attitude for different objects. I enjoy doing math is a measure of attitude, whereas I enjoy solving math questions independently is about preference. Beliefs and judgment are opinions about the objective state of the world. They are used to gather personal evaluation of importance, merit, impact, etc. I listed several examples on the slides for you to get a rough idea. Questions about facts and behaviors are used to learn the truth about certain matters, even though in many cases it's hard to draw distinction between beliefs and facts. An example question could be about transportation mode. The respondent chooses an answer to the question, I go to work by, and the choices are public transportation, car, bicycle, or others. The final category is demographic characteristics. They are fact gathering questions, but listed separately from facts behaviors because it's a specific type of information that researchers almost always need to collect. But questions about facts and behaviors are quite general, and whether you need to use them depends on your research goals. Now you may ask, what type of questions should I use in my study? The answer is that it is an art about how to skillfully gather valid information. For example, in my survey research, if I would want to measure college students' satisfaction with their academic institution, a single question, are you satisfied with your university? Barely provides any useful information. Rather, I need to operationalize this construct and come up with a list of dimensions or aspects that constitute satisfaction with my university as a construct and use it as the basis for constructing my questions. Let's say, based on the literature, student satisfaction can be influenced by tuition cost, student diversity, teacher quality, institutional ranking, dorm and facility conditions, and cafeteria and food. So the questions I may need to ask will include number one, I think the tuition cost of my university is reasonable. Number two, my university has a diverse student body. Number three, most of my professors are good at teaching their subjects. Number four, the national ranking of my institution is not important. Number five, the facility of my dorm is well maintained. Number six, I eat at cafeterias on campus regularly. The questions are about the same construct, but can be formulated to ask about attitude, belief, judgment, and behaviors. Be flexible in the question types so you can focus on the best ways to collect accurate information. You'll always have specific goals for your survey research. You may be interested in measuring the prevalence of attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors, examining the differences between groups of peoples in their attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors, tracking changes in attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors over time, or verifying causal propositions about these attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. One reminder I have for you is about survey research that tests causal propositions. If you directly ask people about reasons for their actions, their reports are usually inaccurate because people either guess about or sometimes are unwilling to tell about the causes of their behaviors. So rather than ask people directly about the reasons for their behavior, a better approach is to use literature and other resources to identify the different possible causes of the type of behaviors and ask about those different possible causes on the survey, then use the information to analyze the results. In other words, you want to use statistical analysis of these answers to reveal the relative importance of the different causes. For this week's homework, we're going to do some exercises to help you to get familiar with this process. I also provided another file in which you can see the operationalization of concept in my college student retention study. Thank you, and I'll talk to you soon.